I'm going to start this video off with a massive disclaimer. My knowledge of the 40k lore is very, and I mean very, surface level. Like newborn without cognitive dissonance levels. I know that it's very gritty, gory, and for every positive thing that happens, 10 tragedies occur at the same time. I know what the Space Marines are, and that there are different chapters of them that all have their own looks and purposes. Heresy is bad, and everything is done in the name of the Emperor. I did try to do some basic research to at least try and learn some terminology, but it is very intimidating when any singular wiki page has at least a dozen hyperlinks before you even start scrolling. This also doesn't cover the DLC, partly because I don't like buying DLC, but mostly because you really don't need it to enjoy the game. With Boltgun 2 on the horizon, if it turns out that the DLC is story relevant, I will include it in that video. If this bothers you at all, then this video is not for you. I will take any and all knowledge that is out there, so please leave a comment. Make it snobby if you want. I'm always open to learning. That's the end of this disclaimer. Please enjoy the show. The term boomer shooter has been around for a few years now. If you're unfamiliar with the term, it's used to describe games that either come from or replicate the style of shooters from the 90s like Doom or Duke Nukem. Unlike most shooters today, these don't put an emphasis on multiplayer, but instead attempt to deliver a single-player run-and-gun style game with emphasis on high speeds, plenty of fodder to tear through, and oftentimes maze-like level design. Developed by RX Digital, Warhammer 40K Boltgun is the first, that I could find, attempt to bring the popular universe into the boomer shooter genre. This type of game has always been entertaining to me. It hits that sweet spot of being simple enough that I can turn off my brain, but offering enough engagement that I don't feel bored. It's certainly not my go-to, but every so often I get the itch to start blasting. My actual exposure to this type of shooter isn't exactly crazy expansive. I'd say the only sort of out there title that I've played is Serious Sam. Regardless, I've got the itch to play some boomer shooters again, and Boltgun has been sitting on my list for quite a while now. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Opinionative Show, an internet thing where I have opinions and you're going to listen to them. These are my opinions on Warhammer 40k Boltgun. Something's going down on the Forge World, Graia. It's been completely overrun with cultists and demons alike. You play as Malum Kaido, an Ultramarine, and are tasked with going down to the planet to recover some power fragment and, of course, cleanse the planet of heresy. You head down in a pod with your squad and things go horribly wrong. You crash land way off course, and everyone else is dead. No matter. The mission must continue. Take up your mighty chainsword and let the cleansing begin. The plot is about as simple as they come, and that's the way it should be. Boomer shooters aren't exactly lacking in the story department, but they certainly aren't crazy epic adventures. Much like a Mario game, it really more serves as an excuse to get shooting. Gameplay is exactly what you'd expect it to be. You run around the levels and shoot anything that crosses your path. Surprisingly, you don't actually start with a gun. Instead, you just have your chainsword. It feels particularly crunchy when you use it, and I love it. This is your melee option. It shreds smaller mooks like generic cultists as well as slightly bigger creatures you'll come across. It does struggle with nurglings though, and I think it's just because when the hitbox actually comes out, you're often above or below these tiny goblin things. At any point in time, you can hit the melee button and the attack comes out swiftly and is very responsive. Holding the button will let you delay the swing, and when you cross over an enemy, the game will actually slow down until you release the button, at which point you will launch forward to your target. By repeatedly mashing the melee button, you will rev the chainsword and do more damage to your target. This is more useful against middle-of-the-road strength enemies who have more health. What I'd recommend doing is going into the menus and changing this option to simply holding the key instead of mashing. It's much more comfortable, and of course anything that reduces wear and tear is a plus. Keep in mind that this won't change the hint you get during the loading screens. Despite having it set to hold the entire time, the game kept telling me to mash the button. Movement in this game is very fast and very hectic. Your default speed is already pretty quick, but there's also a sprint button which feels like it's actually Sonic in this spacesuit. I spent most of the game holding this button down, but when sprinting you do carry much more momentum and as such will slide around a little bit. Since you can't stop on a dime, you'll need to be more careful around hazards and open pits, the latter of which get more numerous as the game goes on. Falling into a pit will only cost you a bit of health, so thankfully it's not the end of the world. I played the game on the medium difficulty and falling only took 20 health. I'm not sure if this changes with higher difficulties or not. You've also got a simple jump that gets you a good amount of height, and you'll climb up ledges as well. That dash the chainsword does, that can also be used for traversal. If you see an enemy on a platform or elevated location you want to get but can't quite reach with a standard jump, just use the chainsword. It's very satisfying to pull off, and likely leads to a secret or two that I missed because I got gun crazy. Of course, it's not really much of a boomer shooter if there aren't guns. You might start with only melee, but soon you'll get your hands on the iconic Boltgun. There are numerous other weapons you'll get your hands on though, including a shotgun, plasma gun, timed mine thrower, bigger machine gun, the melt-a-gun, which has great piercing ability, a laser gun, and an even bigger laser gun. A couple of these may seem a bit redundant, but they are unique enough that you'll end up switching between them constantly depending on what you are facing. The titular bolt gun is basically your bread and butter. It is effective at any range and does a decent amount of damage. As far as I could tell, it did not make a difference where you shot your enemy so long as it connects. The shotgun is great for groups of little guys, but I didn't really get much use out of it unless I found myself trying to conserve other ammo. It does have a good punch to it, as any shotgun should. The heavy bolt gun kind of became my go-to throughout most of the game. Just like its non-heavy counterpart, it has great effective range and damage. Where it shines though is its lack of a need to reload. It's very handy when you're dealing with large groups of enemies or those with larger health bars. It does take a second to actually start shooting, but I don't think that really hinders anything. I've never died because it doesn't fire right away. Against lightly or non-armored targets, I would often switch to the Volkite laser gun. Anything like the frog monsters get shredded by this beam, and is my preferred weapon versus Nurgling groups. It does use up ammo pretty quickly though, so make sure to keep an eye on that. Despite its cool name, I didn't get much use out of the Vengeance launcher. It's a rotary grenade launcher that fires timed explosives. It does absolutely have use, but for me it served the same role as the shotgun, which was to conserve other ammo types. The plasma gun is a bit weird. It fires balls of plasma which have an area of effect that can actually hurt you if you're not careful. It does an insane amount of damage and gets stronger if you fire it rapidly. Great for any enemy, especially groups. Just be careful, as if they get too close to you, you may find your own health disappearing instead. There's an even bigger laser, which I guess isn't exactly a laser. It's basically a black hole laser and is even more effective than the Volkite. It's great for groups, but is especially useful versus bosses. Its main drawback is a very limited ammo count, and unlike other weapon pickups, are especially scarce for it. Finally, we have the Melt-A-Gun. Another weapon that's great for groups and larger threats, but with the added bonus of being able to penetrate not only targets, but walls as well. Ammo isn't quite as limited, but you still won't find as much as the shotgun or bolt gun. Much to my dismay, there is no rocket launcher, which I'd consider to be another staple weapon of the genre. There are also 3 different types of grenades. You have a typical frag, which has a large radius and explodes a few seconds after being thrown, a grenade that explodes on contact, and, if you're skilled enough to find them, vortex grenades. These are like frags, but the radius is much larger and the effect is way more devastating. They can easily clean up big groups of enemies, and I always try to save them for a boss as they will do major damage if they're in the vortex. Throughout the stages, there are numerous pickups you'll find. Scattered everywhere are these pickups that will increase your health in contempt, which is the equivalent to a shield or body armor. They come in varying sizes, with the little ones giving few points, while the larger ones can give up to 200 points. Keep in mind when picking up the larger ones, as they can only get you to 200. The little pickups can net you an extra 50 points above that, and thankfully if you have 200 or more in either, you can't actually pick up the larger ones. These aren't the only things that can be picked up. You'll find pickups for ammo and grenades scattered throughout the levels, some even dropped from enemies such as the Chaos Space Marines. If you've got a keen eye, you can find many secrets hidden throughout the game. Each chapter has several secrets, some of which are obvious, some not so much, and some just require a little bit of effort to reach. Each time you find one, text appears on the screen to let you know you found something special. These range from buffs that set your health or contempt to 300, a munitions boost which not only fills every ammo type you have, but also goes above the normal cap, to a machine spirit upgrade which upgrades whatever weapon you have equipped when picked up. All of these are temporary, but some last longer than others. Most of the abilities only last 30 seconds, including my favorite, the Assault Doctrine, which supercharges your chainsword, making it extra deadly and fun to use. The Machine Spirit upgrade lasts until the end of the current chapter, and there are a handful of special bolt gun ammos that you can find that last one magazine. They do give you a 60 round mag to play with, so be conservative, but not too conservative. These secrets are by no means necessary to beating the game, so don't fret when you end a chapter and see that you missed missed a couple. What did bother me was seeing that I missed enemies in the stage. Right next to the secret count, you have the percentage of enemies defeated. Most of the time, it was a clean 100. There were several stages where I missed some and would end up with 99%. This was likely a small enemy tucked into a corner or one that got lost in the chaos. Now, the amount of enemies defeated doesn't actually matter, but it gave me the same feeling I got playing Crash Bandicoot and seeing that you missed just a couple of boxes at the end of the stage. There is no unlockable tied to it, but you do get a fancy mark on the stage itself. I don't find any of the levels too complicated to navigate, but who actually wants to backtrack to find that one creature you missed? I wouldn't blame you though. Your mission is to purge everything. Thankfully, if it really means that much to you, you can see what percentage you're at in the pause screen. Since I mentioned enemies, let's talk about them for a minute. This is probably where my lack of 40k knowledge really hinders me. It doesn't have an effect on the gameplay, but I don't know what these are. Thankfully, having no prior knowledge didn't make anything harder to fight. When you target an enemy, they have a health bar that shows up and gives you a name. There were a few enemies I recognized right away, such as the Nurglings and Chaos Space Marines, but the rest were pretty easy to understand by first contact. Cultists are the basic grunt soldiers that have a couple variants that boil down to what weapon they use. Much like Nurglings, they aren't much of a threat unless grouped up, but with one exception. The plasma cultists. They go down just like any cultists, but they have a plasma gun just like yours. It does a shocking amount of damage, and they can easily get the drop on you. If you happen to see one in the crowd, make it priority number 1. Going up that list, the Chaos Space Marines are slightly stronger soldiers. They have this really neat black gold armor and quite a bit more health. They primarily fire a gun, but can actually throw grenades at you. They pack a wall up, but the radius is nowhere near the size of your own grenades. There's an even bigger Chaos dude who takes way more punishment, but doesn't move quite as much and is way easier to target with explosives. The actual threat from these guys, though, are the aspiring champions. They charge you, and they are faster than anything else in the game. If you sprint backwards, you can kind of keep pace, but I always end up running into something and taking damage, and they do an insane amount. If you find yourself getting backed into a corner, good luck. What makes them worse is that after they die, they resurrect as an actual champion. There is a loading screen hint that, at least to me, reads that in order to prevent this from happening, you need to prevent them from doing any damage. Sounds simple enough, and it seems like it actually works. What I found out, much later, is there is a much easier and guaranteed way to stop the resurrection. Just keep shooting the body until it violently explodes into a gory mess. After all, a body can't come back to life if there's no body left. It's not all humanoids you'll be fighting. There are plenty of demons as well. There are the aforementioned Nurglings, which are these little goblin-looking things that come at you in large numbers. Just like cultists, they are only a threat in groups. Unlike cultists, they don't stop moving around, and due to their tiny size, makes them a little difficult to target with your chainsword. There are a couple of these toad enemies, one being much bigger than the other. They both have the same attacks. They will either spit something at you, or try to hit you with their tongue. When I started playing, these guys would mess me up something fierce. The smaller ones don't do too much damage, but the big one is especially deadly. I did end up finding a winning strategy to deal with them. If you wiggle back and forth while facing them, it's much easier to avoid their attacks. They track the direction you're moving and are pretty good at leading their targets. Other demons include these screamers, which often come in waves and aren't too deadly other than they're one of 2 flying enemies and, despite their name, don't actually make a whole lot of screaming noises. I've been ambushed by them on several occasions when dealing with other threats in the area. There are horrors, and they come in 2 flavors: pink and blue. Blue horrors just run at you and attack and aren't much of a threat. The pink ones are definitely stronger, but I find they only really hit me when I don't realize they're even there. They do have a ranged attack, but it is very slow. When they're defeated, they actually spawn 2 blue horrors. These guys, as well as the Nurglings, are where I get most use out of my shotgun. Flamers also come in 2 variants, and they fire elaborate fireballs at you that can be pretty tricky to dodge if you're not in an open area. Finally, there are these monstrous bull-like creatures that simply charge you. At the end of some stages, you'll face a boss fight. Some of them are just enemies like the greater plague toad, which later become more common. Others are actually unique creatures, such as a great unclean one or Lord of Change. These guys are the real threats in this game. They have a ton of health, and there is a never-ending flow of enemies to deal with. These are the guys where I go nuts with my firepower, especially since their arenas are typically packed with pickups. As long as you're actively trying to dodge the onslaught, you should be able to survive. As one should do before purchasing a game, I tend to spend a bit of time looking at reviews and discussions, specifically of the negative variety. I do this mostly to see if a bunch of them all say the same thing, typically looking for performance problems. You certainly won't find them here. This game runs as smooth as they come, but one thing I did notice is that there are quite a few people who think the level design is either boring or confusing. Boring is certainly subjective, but I have to disagree with them. What you see is what you get, and this retro style aesthetic they're going for really tickles my brain. There's even a couple sliders that can adjust how crunchy everything looks, or even smooth it out if you so desire. I kept it on default throughout the game. I think it looks fine regardless. I don't know if every Forge world in 40k looks like this, but the planet you're on is devoid of flora and you will be staring at factory settings throughout the entire game. There is a bit of gothic mixed into it, so as long as you think a gothic building made entirely of steel looks cool, then you'll definitely like what you see here. The few bits where you're outside aren't really much to look at though. I do very much like the first area you're in. I'm a big fan of snowy areas, and the mountainside is a neat backdrop. As you get further into the game, it becomes more desert-like, and I will admit that is much less my style. These areas all definitely look samey, but as long as there are heretics to purge, I don't really care all that much what the landscape looks like. Another thing I've seen people complain about is that the levels are confusing and easy to get lost in. My only reply to this is, how? Your faithful companion, the Servo Skull, is this skull torch contraption that follows you around as you play the game. It offers insight on the current situation, and more importantly, with the push of a button, will show you not only your objective, but will also give you a path on the floor a la Dead Space. This effectively means that if you get lost, it is entirely on you and not the level design. Even without it, the levels are nowhere near as confusing as other boomer shooters. They aren't exactly all hallways, but I never found myself aimlessly backtracking and combing over stages to find a key that I missed. Like most of these games, there are keys to find to open doors, but they are massive and impossible to miss when you see them. Even if you did somehow fly past one, just use the nav button and you'll be put back on the right path. Apparently, some people take issue with the Servo Skull itself, but I think it's harmless. I'm not afraid to use the navigation if I'm bumbling around, and I don't find it to be intrusive. I am bothered with it not having voiced dialogue though. For the most part, the things it has to say are consequential. Simply little quips about how the door is progress or activating purge mode when you come across an arena. It does occasionally say something that I actually want to read, and often that's happening in the middle of a shootout. I'm fairly adept with multitasking, but there's so much going on and the game speed is so fast that I focus so hard on not dying that I just can't comfortably read what is being said. The Servo Skull isn't the only thing that talks either, and it's even more frustrating in those cases. Another thing you will undoubtedly see when scrolling people's opinions is the game is too difficult, even on medium. Of course, you've got the completely opposite side of, I beat the game on the hardest difficulty and it was easy. But that just comes with the territory. Difficulty in games is a subject of its own, but as I mentioned earlier, I played this game on medium, and that is where all my experience is based on. And I have to agree, I think the difficulty curve is a bit off. What I mean is it's less of a curve and more like a graph with several peaks and troughs. I'd be coasting through a few levels practically on autopilot, then suddenly I've hit a wall and find myself dying way more. The first time this happened is the initial encounter with a greater plague toad. I didn't have my wiggle strategy at the time, so it would destroy me in no time flat. It frustrated me, but after taking a bit of a break, I came back to it and it was like a switch in my mind flipped and the toad was defeated. The game after that felt way easier, and as far as I'm aware, there wasn't any update pushed out that changed difficulty. There were still some roadblocks along the way, but it came in the form of what I expect of any boomer shooter, and that's just sometimes the amount of enemies you have to contend with can get cumbersome. Anytime the Servo Skull tells you it's purging time, you better expect an onslaught. Personally, my issues with these parts boil down to the arenas themselves. I prefer when the arenas are more densely packed. Not only does this just provide more cover, but there are often more hidden pickups for me to find. If you ever struggled with these arenas, just try to break away from the action and scout along the edges, as you're bound to find a major health or contempt pickup that'll allow you to get right back into the action. I look forward to these arenas, though some of them do tend to drag on just a bit too long, especially towards the end game. Like any game, this one certainly isn't perfect. While I enjoy the core design, there are a few things I take issue with. Let's start with something super nitpicky, and I'm going to show you what it is. Can you guess what my issue is? Let's look at it happen in a different scenario. If you guess that it's me firing off a single shot like a dolt after loading a stage, you are correct. It's such a minor thing, but it annoys me to no end. In no scenario will one single bullet affect you, but when I click through a press any button to continue, I don't expect it to carry that command through to the next screen. This happens every time, and every time I'm annoyed by it. Alright, I do have some actual criticism that does have a negative impact on my experience. Sadly, one of those criticisms is the soundtrack. It's not a case of being bad, it's actually worse than that. It left absolutely no impression on me whatsoever. I intend to talk about this topic in more depth at some point, but the short of the long is that a video game soundtrack is one of the most important things to me and will dramatically help give games a lasting impression in my mind. Think of your favorite games. There's probably at least one track that you enjoy enough to keep it stored away in that brain of yours. Whether it's a level, boss fight, or even a title screen, you likely can't picture it without the associated track to go with it. It doesn't even have to be a good impact. Having a really bad track or two is better than nothing. Boltgun doesn't have any of that. Again, I won't say it's bad, as it definitely fits in. It just blends into the chaos too much. Another issue I have is this game has one of my least favorite modern day game designs, and it has to do with visual design. I stated earlier that the game does a good job of keeping you on the right path, and the servo skull serves as an excellent aid if you get lost. Yet they still felt the need to take a page out of the AAA playbook and put paint on parts of the levels. I despise this design philosophy. It's one thing if it was just on the easiest difficulty, but nope, it's right there. It's out of place, and it is as insulting as ever. I get it, the painted ledges have been around for forever at this point and serve their purpose to distinguish traversable from non-traversable landscapes, but they aren't needed here. I don't think they're needed in any game, but in Boltgun, if there's a ledge, you can climb it so long as you have the height to do so. They even have paint on areas that just lead to secrets. This is so lame. You can see that the crate is open from the ground, so naturally this leads you to looking around the level's geometry to find a way to get to it. Paint was never necessary, and if there's ever anything that's going to pull me out of the experience, it's this. Finally, or more frustratingly, there's what happens after you progress through each chapter. In total, there are 3 chapters that are broken down into several stages. Going from stage to stage isn't an issue and works exactly as you'd expect. It's going from chapter to chapter where the game suddenly decides to strip you of everything except your bolt gun. Throughout the stages, you'll find weapons to pick up and plenty of copies as well. For the first chapter, I thought this was kind of neat, as picking up a copy gives you more ammo than a standard pickup, and serves as another chance to actually get the gun should you miss the first one. Going from stage to stage, your guns and ammo stay the same. I get when a sequel game starts you back at square one, but why set you back simply because you changed chapters? There isn't even any in-game reason for it. You simply just lose all your guns and have to find them again in the next chapter. You do re-find them rather quickly, and only having 3 chapters means it only happens twice, but I still find the whole ordeal unnecessary. It wouldn't be much of an opinionative video if I didn't talk about the ending. If you haven't played it yet, here's your spoiler warning. Though for this type of game, it really doesn't matter much at all. After rushing through the facilities and purging all heresy along the way, you find out that the fragment you were looking for has already been taken by a heretic psyker, Tumulus Semiel. This monster plans to use it for nefarious purposes, and it's your job to purge him. The final stage leading up to this fight is an endurance run. You're in a giant elevator which, as you've probably guessed, is just a giant arena. You need 3 keys to make it to the top, with each key bringing you to a different floor. Each time you return with a key, you go through another purge sequence. The arena itself is filled with things to climb on, as well as pickups placed everywhere. By the end of it, I was definitely feeling fatigued, as the arena itself doesn't change much except for the keys removing some laser barriers that house some power-ups. When you finally make it to the top, the real fight begins. As a psyker, Tumulus has an array of magical abilities that deal a lot of damage and can be tough to dodge. Just like any boss, he is also accompanied by waves of other enemies, and you'll be facing all of them, from cultists to the floating bloat drones and even bosses. Tumulus has a crazy amount of health and even this impenetrable shield. Before you can even touch him, you need to defeat whatever monster it's linked to, and I believe it just links to whatever monster is the strongest. There are 3 phases to the fight, but I was honestly too busy running around to notice any real change beyond you just need to beat him down again. You need to stay mobile for this fight. Stopping is almost certain death. Just like any arena, there are tons of pickups for you to find, but even with all of these, I still find myself on the defensive for a lot of the fight. It felt like forever, but the fun kind of forever, because after I landed that final shot, I felt very satisfied. I was low on health, and the shot was basically a Hail Mary, but Emperor protects indeed. After defeating him, you recover the fragment you've been looking for and return it to the tech priest, who is grateful, but there's no time to rest. There are still heretics to purge. The fight is not over yet. Malum gears up for his next mission, and the game ends. Warhammer 40K Boltgun is a fun experience through and through. I don't know what games have done recently to push the boomer shooter genre, but this game is pretty safe with that formula. Even with their promotional material, they are definitely trying to go for a nostalgic feel with crunchy visuals, sprites over 3D models, and high-octane run-and-gun action. If you like these kinds of games, then this game is a no-brainer, especially if you're a fan of the 40K universe. If you're looking for something that pushed the boundaries of what you'd expect out of a boomer shooter, then approach this one with caution. If you, like me, are unfamiliar and perhaps just a bit intimidated by 40K, then let me put those worries to rest. You don't need to know anything about it in order to understand this game. You certainly won't be learning much either, but I never felt like I was missing out on something because my knowledge is limited to Space Marines cool. It's not a very long adventure either. It took me about 9 hours to get through, making it great if you just want some mindless weekend fun. So with all that said, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching the Opinionative Show. I hope you enjoyed the video. Have a fantastic rest of your day.